Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the July 13th meeting of the Louisiana Outdoor Forever Technical Advisory Board. Before we get started, I ask everybody to put your phones on silent or vibrate. We actually have cell signal in this room, so it's a little unusual for people, but please do so. So to get started, Angela, if you please call the roll.
Taylor Terry on behalf of Brandon Burris.
Here.
Cheston Hill.
Here.
Jerry Davenport on behalf of Theron Phillips.
Here.
Amy Prayu, she's absent. Sarah Krupa.
Here.
Scott Longman.
Here.
Kent Bullfrass on behalf of Brian Lazina.
Here.
Zach Lemoyne.
Here.
Ray Herndon.
Here.
Lisa Kreisman.
Here.
Eric Johnson.
Here.
We have 10 board members in attendance today. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Angela. If everyone's taken a chance to review the minutes from the May 25th meeting, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I move.
Have a motion and a second. Any opposition? Okay, that's approved. Also, if you reviewed the agenda for today, I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda. So moved. Have a motion and a second. No opposition. Okay, getting started. Our first agenda item is a presentation by the Louisiana Outdoor Forever Steering Committee on their history and vision by Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited, the Director of Public Policy for the Southern Region. Ed, if you're ready, you can go to the podium.
Good morning, everybody. I do not have a PowerPoint, but I have some comments that I would love to share with y'all. And I apologize for being behind y'all. But thanks for the opportunity to speak. I want to make my comments kind of interactive. So please let me know if you have questions or need some clarification, but I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. I'm Ed Penny. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Ducks Unlimited in the Southern Region. I'm based in Ridgeland, Mississippi, and work on state and federal policy that supports our mission. We were proud to be part of the team that helped establish the Louisiana Outdoors Forever program, and I'm honored to speak on behalf of the steering committee. Unfortunately, I haven't had the pleasure of working with y'all individually, but I know your organizations very well, and I recognize and respect your role in conservation. DU and our partners on the steering committee are committed to making the program a success, and we appreciate your willingness and diligence in serving on this board, the Technical Advisory Board. We all want the same outcome as you, to secure Louisiana's diverse natural resources and also make them available for all Louisianans to enjoy, both now and in the future. So as you deliberate and discuss the process and procedures of project selection today, we want to share some background and context and then provide a few recommendations for the next few months. And I hope that these are taken constructively. We sent a letter to the board and to the project selection board with some recommendations. And we want this to be a dialogue. Again, I want this to be a conversation, interactive. We're here to be used as a resource. I know you each have day jobs, and this is what I do for a living and work on conservation funding. I'd like to talk more about what's happening in Mississippi across the river. We got the Mississippi Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund passed in 2022. So I think that there's some experiences to share there, both positive and negative. So we can talk about that more. But first of all, some highlights on context and the history of the steering committee and the program. And again, you know, I don't want to sound in any way condescending. I know everybody understands what the program is supposed to do, but this is our perspective. So the steering committee, which is a coalition of diverse natural resource agencies and conservation organizations, began meeting in 2017 to discuss statewide conservation needs and new funding opportunities. This steering committee is unique, or the steering committee in Louisiana is unique, and that includes both state and federal agencies, along with conservation groups like Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, and others, Audubon. So from the beginning, the discussion was largely centered around the creation of a new state-level dedicated funding source that would spur investment in conserving natural resources by providing matching funds to leverage other federal, state, local government, and private dollars. Our members work at both regional and national scales, and have learned best practices from other dedicated funding programs around the country, including Mississippi, which, as I said, passed a program in 2022. We're also very engaged in the work of the legislatively created Outdoor Conservation Study Group, which informed the bill in 2022 that authorized the program. This study group, which included members of the legislature, heard testimony from a diverse group of interests and published a report of findings on what would be included in the legislation. And the legislation, as we know, was championed by Representative Zizarang, who's a leader in the National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucuses. It was overwhelmingly supported in the Senate by reiterating the idea of land, water, and wildlife conservation through collaboration and voluntary conservation. So that's a little background. Are there any questions about that or how we got to that point? I know several of your agencies and entities were also on that steering committee. Good. So second, we want to provide our thoughts on a few things. So far, the program, the RFP, has been remarkably successful. I believe there are over 50 pre-applications received with funding requests of $49 million. These applications would also leverage an additional $65 million for a total amount of $114 million. So, you know, that's a lot of projects. So it's a lot of proposals. It's a lot of work to go through. So as you deliberate the next steps, it's important to recall from the law the types of projects eligible for funding. And I quote here, Cole, you can remind me what section it is, but the following types of projects may be eligible for funding. Land conservation of important natural areas, including fish and wildlife habitat, water quality projects related to land conservation or land management, including those lands that protect drinking water supplies, working land, farms, and forested land, recreational properties related to important natural areas and public use, and historic properties adjacent to or integral to habitat restoration or enhancement. So there's some common important threads woven in all these categories that are integral to fulfilling the purpose of the program. For example, important natural areas. These are areas that support the native plants and animals of that habitat. This could be longleaf pine habitat, coastal marsh, cypress swamp, bottomland hardwoods, coastal prairie, all of these things. The term recreational properties speaks to the overlap between an important natural area and recreation, and it's important to remember outdoor recreation here. Nature trails, swimming areas along scenic streams. Protecting these natural areas or recreational properties that are connected to these natural areas is one of the intentions and goes beyond simply ball fields or clear grass, parks, etc. Also, the connection of land conservation or land management with water quality projects is largely intended to consider projects that conserve drinking water supplies through protecting upstream habitats. Particularly in RCS, different entities have programs that restore habitat to protect drinking water supplies. Those are intended to do that. We had a lot of discussions at the steering committee level at the very beginning. Water quality is an important issue. By all means, we need clean drinking water. But what does that look like? What does a project look like? It's not a sewage treatment plant. It's not hard infrastructure. It's habitat conservation to protect sources of drinking water. So that's kind of where we came down to from a steering committee level. So with that being said, one more thing is, you know, particularly with DU's mission area, we're protecting wetland habitats that help cleanse adjacent water bodies. So discussing and sharing these thoughts on these criteria in anticipation of your review of all these applications will help set the stage for the future of the program and ensure a more consistent and defensible approach. So other things to keep in mind related to project selection. Again, these are included in the letter that we sent you. And again, it's meant and intended to be constructive, particularly with the Technical Advisory Board. Reviewing and assessing each pre-application and application is extremely time consuming. You know, one of the best examples on a funding source that works at the federal level is the North American Wetland Conservation Act. There's hundreds of proposals that are submitted twice a year. Typically, they narrow it down to about 40 to 50. So it's a pretty intensive and pretty competitive process. And each staff member, and those are appointed, each staff member has to score each individual proposal. In past years, LDWF has had a representative on the NACA Council and at the staff level. Larry Reynolds, a waterfowl biologist, did that for the Mississippi Flyway Council. And it took a massive amount of work. So I don't want to in any way underestimate or underplay the amount of work that it takes. And I encourage you to work hard at this because it does mean a lot to the program. So please carefully review each project application, become familiar with the review process. Your meeting today will begin the discussion of the scoring process and how to tabulate and compile each TAB member's input into a single score. I don't pretend to know that. That's process, and I'm not necessarily a process person, but it's extremely important. So don't downplay it. And connected to the project selection board, the PSB will be presented with the applications and their associated scores. So the PSB will then decide on projects, and that's the role of the PSB. Since this is the first project review and approval by the PSB of proposed projects, we recommend a meeting of the PSB to discuss and prepare for this process prior to final project selection. We also want to make the point that there needs to be collaboration between this board, the Technical Advisory Board, and the Project Selection Board. We encourage open communication between the two boards to improve understanding of the role of each group by each appointed member. Obviously, the program is governed by a PSB and is advised by a TAB, and the TAB is required to review and evaluate applications in accordance with the criteria and scoring review and forward these scores with the application to the PSB. So as the TAB is beginning the process to discuss and agree upon an approach to review and score these applications, there needs to be a joint meeting between the two boards so that this can all be discussed. And we understand that open meetings need to be established. This board and the other board have done a great job of being transparent and open, and that needs to continue. But there also needs to be very open communication about how to move forward. So in closing, we're thrilled to see this initial funding level of $10 million. You know, again, there were $49 million in requests. So $10 million is obviously not enough. We want to make sure that this program is funded into the future. And one of the best ways to do that is to ensure accountability. It's to ensure the intent of the program is followed. And so we can get future funding secured. And we're not done yet. In Mississippi, I would say that the process has also been very slow going. They passed a bill at the same time as Louisiana did, or the same session. But I would say that there's even more interest in Louisiana for this type of program than there has been in Mississippi. So that is a very successful thing that we should all be proud of. We're happy to be part of this process. We appreciate the opportunity to make comment. And again, use us as a resource. We see these kinds of programs working in different ways around the country. So we look forward to making sure that this one is successful as others. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions for Ed?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, and the next item on the agenda is to discuss a plan on compiling scores ranking of full applications. And the discussion sort of with this letter from the steering committee and discussions with staff, we wanted to get together and talk about this because just the ranking in our first iteration of all the applications, I don't know about you, but it took me days, along with my other duties, to try and get through that checklist, a simple checklist on each application. So looking back on that, having to go through these questions on a full application, I think is going to be quite an onerous task. And I wanted to get together and talk about it and make sure we understood the process and maybe come up with some steps for all of us to adhere to. So with that, is there any thoughts from the board itself?
Yeah, I would just say I appreciate your comments, Ed, and just wanted to recognize that Tim Landreneau with NRCS and Joey Bro with LDAF, have been members of the steering committee along with Ray and myself, and I know the governor's office. I mean, there's just different people that have been involved for a period of time, and then in the study group. So I think to have, everybody here as a resource to kind of share as we go through this process, I just wanted to acknowledge the people in the audience in particular. But, one of the things that I think spurred some of the steering committee's thoughts about this with this memo is that if you look at the Appendix A that's in the manual, and I don't know if we have a way to, it was referenced in the letter, but and I don't know if you guys have a copy or we have a way to show that to people, but it kind of breaks down relative to the 5 categories that Ed referenced, questions that we would use to score. And in our discussions within the steering committee, these categories, I think, deserve a little further discussion. So that's kind of where we came from. For example, question number 1, the project needs and benefits. That scores, that's 50 points of the total 100. Under that, there are 7 subcategories: outdoor recreational opportunity, cultural and historical value, water qualities, so on. And that's just, how we spread those 50 points across all those subcategories isn't clarified yet. I mean, I think we all recognize some of this is just the ongoing process of developing this. And one of the thoughts was, well, are there certain subcategories here that align better with the statutory language and intent of the program and maybe get a few more points than others? If you say under this category, you get 50 points. Well, if you check one box, do you get all 50 points? Or so I think kind of working through these criteria would be a recommendation of mine and the steering committees, I guess, to speak on behalf of the steering committee, to help us say, okay, outdoor recreation, does this project provide new or enhanced recreational access to green space and a natural environment? Will the project provide outdoor nature-based recreational opportunities? So thinking about, that's just one of 7. Okay, is recreation a primary part of this scoring and the intent of the legislation? Then out of that 50 points, how much would we want to give to recreation? And then of those points you give to recreation, let's say you give 10. Well, this project does some stuff, but not enough. So you may give 5 points. So I'm being laborious here in the pulling this apart a little bit, but that's where we see kind of this taking an application and looking at all the information there and translating that into scores. We wanted to have this conversation so that, not to say everybody's going to score the same. I mean, based on where we come from and what we prioritize in our individual roles, there's going to be some influence there, but just that we're thinking about it in the same way, that this is what we meant by recreation. This is what we meant by cultural and historical value, that type of thing.
Yeah, I would have concern if we were talking about weighting each one of these separately, because I think, in my opinion, the intent of the legislation by putting each one of us on this board was to bring the different perspectives of each agency and NGO. So looking at this project needs and benefits, one of them is outdoor recreation opportunity, and then there's say contiguousness. As a LDWF employee, I might be looking more at recreation and contiguous with a WMA or refuge, whereas DEQ may be looking at water quality. So I think I don't want to tie anyone's hands on how they interpret it and how they bring their biases, quite frankly, from their agency or their viewpoints to be able to come up with their score independent of everyone else. And I think we all had that opportunity to go through this as we develop these questions and criteria.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, our obligation is to fulfill the statutory intent of the program. We do have knowledge that we bring to the decision-making, but it should still be not what I want from the Nature Conservancy standpoint alone. It's what was this program intended to do? And I think there's going to be give and take for all of us around the table. You know, I feel primarily that it's, you know, the intent of the program that filters initially where we're at. And then we're like, well, gosh, these two projects are very similar. This one meets the statutory language, or they both meet it equally. But I'm really think land conservation is important, so I'll give it a little bit of extra point. And some of that's splitting hairs, I guess. You know, as I've thought about this, you know, the steering committee worked for what, 6 years to this point, and not everybody at the table has. And maybe you're happy that you don't have had, you haven't had that experience, but it's through that process that we upheld the program and worked with Z and got the legislation passed. And so this conversation, to me, I would like to think could be helpful to those other members of the Technical Advisory Board to be like, oh, okay, that's what they meant by this. I thought about it, you know, cleaning litter out of a waterway as a positive thing for water quality, and it is, but that's not really what this program was stood up to do. So that's where we felt like some conversation would be helpful. And, you know, so maybe we don't break the scoring down, but it's, I don't know if there's experience in Mississippi or people have other experience, you know, this first one, the others are much more, you know, there's other questions, 3 underserved areas. Boom, that's it, 10 points that you can consider to apply for that one. It's just this first one that has the pithy part of the program in there. And so I'll pass it on to others.
Just to kind of follow on that thought from Lisa, you know, I guess my question is, and I appreciate where you're coming from there, Scott, with regard to each of us are representing our own organization or agencies, and that is going to show through, and that's just a fact. I guess, but back to the kind of the 50 points and you know, how we each individually approach, you know, the awarding of those points, it seems to me there's got to be some sort of recognition that, you know, either we all agree that an applicant can check one of these 7 boxes and get all 50 points, or maybe that's not quite where we should stand as a group. I do not think personally that an applicant coming in and checking, let's say, just pick one. You know, there's a stewardship element to the submission that they would get 50 points. And I guess that's kind of, you know, that was my thinking going in, that somehow, you know, I will have to spread out these 50 points across these 7 elements or 7 components. I don't know how I'm going to try to tackle that, frankly, but that's, I think that's a piece of the conversation that we could have briefly this morning and see if there's some consensus amongst this group in particular.
Yeah, I agree that there has to be some scalability whenever you look at this. And in my thought, going through the questions, these were thoughts of the board for me to consider when reviewing the application. Each one of these questions, you know, if it's outdoor recreation opportunity, I would go through these questions in details to try and parse out how many points I'm going to give this application. So no, I agree. Definitely, we can go through this and talk about how we intend to spread the points. But I just didn't want to say, you know, outdoor recreation opportunity should get, you know, one way, I'm just picking on the one because it's the first one off the list, should be weighted heavier than anything else. I think every application is going to be its own entity. And we'll have to use this as our guide to try and move that needle back and forth and give it the number of points we think it deserves. And then after that, and we need to talk about this more, I think we have to have some way of compiling these scores prior to our meetings and then getting together. And I foresee, just me, the meeting as the point to get together and talk about how we have already scored them. And then we can debate the scores within the applications themselves. If we come to the meetings to score, this is going to take us forever. And there's no way we can do that. So I think this board has to take each application as it comes in and score it, get their scores together, and then we come together and discuss how each of us scored it and why. So I think that actually gives two opportunities for us to look at that, to peel back the onion and say, why did you give it, 40 points here or 30 points there? Any other thoughts from the board?
I think one of the practical challenges that I have as I'm looking at this is that some projects are going to touch on multiple of these subcategories under question one, and others maybe really good projects, but just hit one of those really well. And sort of how do we balance those trade-offs, right?
Yeah, that is a good point. I think maybe that's when we get here and argue and say, you know what? This one maybe, needs to be ranked higher. But I guess that's, I don't remember in the legislation if it says, we rank them, we score them and rank them, but do we rank them from their score alone? Or is that a debate we have and say, this one may have outscored this one, but I think it's a better project because X, Y, Z, so I want it higher.
My recollection is that we just submit a score. It's, number one or the 100 points down, and there may be multiple points. And then the project selection board.
I think actually we prioritize. Now, whether that's score or not, I'd have to go back to the enabling legislation, but I think we prioritize and then the project selection board picks as they see fit. And they can pick from the bottom if they wanted to, but that's their.
Right. I
purview.
think they're given the leniency to do
Correct.
pick anything. My impression was we were supposed to be totally objective in our selection, and that would be based on the number, and that we passed the number on, and then they could apply. And I think that's where some of the challenge is that there's a lot of variables that could influence what ultimately gets selected and how much money goes to each project. It could be, we want this to be a statewide program, and there's only a couple applications from the north. And so we want to consider those more favorably. Maybe the score's not as high as somebody else, but there are other nuances the project selection board can apply to what they end up ultimately picking. And what I would like to propose, and I don't know that everybody has access to the Appendix A, is that we just walk through each of these. If ultimately we don't allocate some sub amount to each category, or look at the statutory language and say, these things were emphasized over these others. But we'll maybe just have talked through it where it's like, oh, okay, that's what the legislation meant. Because I think if we go away from here without that discussion and everybody scores it based on there, and then we come together and argue the points, that's harder to do than maybe to enter into the process with a little bit more shared appreciation for what was intended.
And actually I have Appendix A in front of me, and the first paragraph, if you'll indulge me to read from it, says Act 714 of the 2022 regular session stipulates that projects shall be evaluated by the Technical Advisory Board and selected by the Project Selection Board using defined criteria and scoring based on a clear, defensible, science-based process. Such rules shall include procedures for applying to the program and detailed criteria and scoring to be used by the boards in their evaluation and selection of projects for funding. So that I was looking for what the guidance was, and that is the guidance. So I'm not opposed to going through this. I do have, yeah, like I said before, I really would be opposed to waiting anything, but I certainly think we need to discuss it and hash it out as we see fit. How do you propose doing it?
Gosh, you guys should have it memorized. I don't know.
I'm gonna go make 10 copies, so.
All right. Yeah. Make it 11.
You know, there was one other just general question that has come to me as people have been approved for the pre-application and moved to the application phase. And I didn't know if I could just bring that up as he goes to get that. I know.
Sure.
So it has to do with the matching funds. You know, and one of the things we've talked about in here is the challenge with a lot of the different federal funding programs or state funding is they've got a deadline. You submit the application, just like ours. You wait a few months till you hear if you've made it to the next stage, and then you submit some more information. And so the question was, if people put in a certain match from a party or for a certain amount, and that changes before the full application, is that allowable? And just one caveat on that, I know we said, well, gosh, the decision to move it through the pre-application was based on the information in the pre-application, but all we talked about is who the partner is that you work with if you're an NGO and if you met one of these criteria. As long as those don't change, are we willing to entertain that the application sets forth some changes from the original pre-application, because there's been clarification and additional information provided?
And my understanding, the pre-application, when we looked at it, we were just looking for eligibility. As
Mhm.
long as it still maintains that eligibility, I think the rest of it will be assessed through the scoring process,
I mean,
in my opinion.
okay, thank you. That helps.
Anybody have any stories they'd like to tell while we're waiting?
What you did for your summer vacation. Oh,
Excuse me, Scott. I was wondering if Ed might be able to give us some information about the positives and negatives from Mississippi that he.
Sure, I was
so
actually just
mentioned.
thinking about that. And one important point. Thanks. One important point I just thought about was in Mississippi, the Mississippi Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund does not have a technical advisory board. It's simply made up of one board that's been appointed by governor, lieutenant governor. And so they had to do all this deliberation alone. They didn't have the technical experts that are here. So it was more of an educational process for them, and they had a lot more conversations before they started scoring proposals. But that's one thing that I think Louisiana is doing well. But I think therefore it'll take a little bit longer to get to the actual approval step. And I think it'll be probably more defensible compared to what Mississippi has done. We still came out with a great outcome, lots of diverse projects that were funded, and everybody was happy, even the ones that were not funded are encouraged to resubmit the following year because we did get additional funding. But that's one key point. They hired a program manager kind of halfway through the process. So the program manager was basically administering the same thing that Angela's doing. So it's good that Angela has been here since the beginning. So that's a positive. But I would say that those deliberations and conversations, they had weekly meetings compared to monthly meetings or quarterly meetings. That board once it was appointed, was meeting weekly to talk about these things. Now, obviously, not all meetings were an hour, some were longer than an hour, but they were pretty engaged, pretty committed to it. They realized the enormity of the task and how, and quite honestly, and they would say this too, that they weren't that experienced in on the ground conservation. So, y'all bring a lot more expertise at the very beginning, I would say. So a few points there as things come to mind, be happy to share more, but there's no getting around the difficulty of these deliberations and discussions that y'all are having right now. So I encourage you to keep having them, because every funding program has to go through this same thing, because every funding program is slightly different and prioritizes different things. But keep it up. I think it's a great conversation.
Ed, did they have like a scoring matrix, kind of like we have here?
They did not have it as prescriptive as what y'all are working on. The legislation was way more prescriptive in what it would fund compared to what Louisiana Outdoor Forever has in the legislation. It's a little bit more general here, but they didn't have that matrix. Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
One more thing, Ricky Flynn, who's the program manager, he's talked to me informally. He'd be willing to give a more formal presentation than what I'm giving. So I would offer that to you as well.
I will say something that occurred to me earlier, and this is probably something that you're already doing, but I have not really talked about it with my peers, is not necessarily having to rank these yourself in a vacuum, but bring together some of your peers within your NGO or agency to assist. It may be good to bounce it off of them and get some assistance and not just be on your shoulders. So I don't know if you've considered that. I had not, but I definitely will.
That's probably something we'll do. But I just want to clarify, you're not saying divide the effort, 10 for this person, 10 for this person, 10 for this person. It's across the board. Everyone's got to go through it, right?
Correct. And that, well, at the end of the day, each member of this board has to come with the application scored. I would hope that you would see them all, but at the end, I'm not going to know who did what.
Right. And I guess what I'm getting at is, I think it's important for continuity for whatever the group is, whether it's an individual or several people on a team reviewing them, going through all 50 applications, just to make sure that, you're applying the same type of reasoning and logic and all that sort of stuff. Because, I mean, having several other efforts where I've done similar things, or even going back to my grad school days, grading papers, the first one you grade, you almost got to go back to that after you're done and redo it. And you can't just, look at a subset of them and say, oh yeah, I've got this process pegged and, I'm good to go. You kind of have to go through the whole thing. And then at the end, your evaluation might actually have sort of morphed over time. Like, oh, well, early on, I wasn't applying this logic. Now I got to go back and apply this logic. So I guess there's the two things. Make sure everyone on your team is, reviewing the entire set of applications, but then making sure that you're willing to, learn from yourself, I guess, and go back and apply things across the board the same if things change throughout the evaluation process.
It's continuity. That's the appendix.
Can I ask, do we know exactly what we're presenting to the PSB? Is it the project selection board? Is it just a singular number that sort of represents the average or some kind of range of what the scores were? Or are they going to be able to evaluate every single score from every single project from every single board member?
Well, that's something for us to discuss here today, I would guess. But yeah, I would envision it being both. Just a spreadsheet of the applications ranked and their scores. And we could even, and again, this is for discussion and everybody's opinion, but you could have the scores for each category out and how they fared so that they can, so it's completely open as to how we prioritized and scored them. But again, that's just my vision right now. Okay, does everybody have a copy of Appendix A? Right, Lisa, you want to read through that now?
Sure.
It was your idea.
So, but just one thought following on this is that would it be helpful or not to have, let's say, here's my matrix. Then I've got, application number 1, question number 1, outdoor recreation. I'm going to give it X points. I need to do that for myself and I guess supply that, if that's how we come up with doing this. But should we keep that documentation and have it as share those, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think you'll need it for our meeting so that you can defend your position.
Right. But then do we share that with each other or do we catalog that in some way to see? I don't know. I'm thinking of this off the top of my head. I don't know if that would like if that becomes a public record, then somebody could say, well, gosh, why did Lisa vote? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go call her up and, not that it's, there's that many people out there looking for that opportunity, but I'm just thinking through process with that too, with keeping up with those records, but just food for thought. We should come to the meeting with them and then potentially share them or not. So
I would, and again, here's my opinion. I would recommend that one, as I said in the beginning, as these applications come in, you start ranking them. And then also, I think it would be appropriate, and I guess Cole, tell me if this is wrong, but for Angela to have a spreadsheet for the applications and the scores, and as we send them, she's populating that spreadsheet so that it can be ready for whenever we get together to discuss it. But I'm not sure if that's putting the cart before the horse or what. Cole?
Should we be evaluating and turning in scores blindly, though? Should we be, as individual board members, not influenced by other board members' votes?
So you could go and look and see and say,
Yeah.
well, so-and-so is scoring it.
right.
Yeah,
Right. I
that
mean,
is a good point.
maybe we turn them in, but maybe it's
just a number.
hidden for a while, until,
Well,
I don't
and
know.
unfortunately, anything sent to this agency, I would imagine this would be public record should someone want to, if you wanted to FOIA.
Well, eventually it will be, right? It's just
Correct.
when the process is closed, then it becomes public record.
So I'll try to weigh in on a couple of
please.
these issues that have been bounced around. First of all, I'd like to commend y'all on taking this opportunity to have this discussion. I think this is important. Obviously, the enabling statutes gave us a framework, the rules and regulations that were promulgated by the selection board, flesh that out a little further, but there's clearly, some procedural questions and y'all are tackling those today. So I commend you for that. I think you do have some leeway on how you do this. I mean, the statute says that y'all are to evaluate, apply the scoring criteria, and then provide your assessment to the PSB. So whether that is a objective number based on, the collecting of each of your independent scoring and then averaged out, and that's just what they get, that's one thing. If it's, hey, we went through that exercise, then we got back together and we had an open discussion in an open meeting and we came up with a ranking that doesn't necessarily have a number associated with it, but we went through the scoring criteria and this is how we're going to rank them and give you that. I think that qualifies as an assessment under the law. So I think you have a lot of leeway here depending on how y'all want to approach it. Regarding the public records aspect, I think the things that y'all do independently and your scoring is not going to be a public record. What you do submit to Angela, and the culmination of the scoring, each individual scoring that's submitted, I think that becomes work product of this body. Your notes that you're keeping when you're doing it independently, I don't believe is going to arise to that level. When does it become a public record? Is it immediate upon submission, or are we going to kind of keep those close to the vest? Should somebody on the board want to know how other people voted? I think there's probably some exemptions that we could find in the record, because I think, for public policy purposes, the idea would be that these are objectively scored, and you have to weigh the open meetings laws that says any deliberation that occurs has to be done in an open and transparent manner versus, is this a public record, and do you as a board member have the ability to go see how other people scored? I think that kind of undercuts the transparent deliberation process. So, that'll be a decision, I suppose, for my office, but I think I'm comfortable saying now it will be a public record. It may not be until they are due and have become a final document. You may change your scoring, so we can kind of call that a preliminary work product, is my thoughts on that. So happy to answer any more questions. I do have to run to a meeting here in 13 minutes, but I'll be here as long as I can.
So I have a question. With the applications that an applicant submits, at what point do those become public record? And the reason I'm saying, could that be one of those things that is shared after the review process? Because sometimes the negotiations and the content of a project can need to be confidential for a variety of reasons. But I see once, if it's selected and going to be funded, then it's going to be, but
My gut feel on that is once the period for submitting full applications has expired, it's going to be a public record. Now, if there's some confidentiality that the public record that would apply for an exemption to the public records, maybe that portion is redacted, talking about funding or, land acquisition,
Or
some
negotiating with the
ongoing,
landowner or
ongoing
something.
negotiations, something like that. I mean, there's lots of exemptions to public records, but I think the application itself, once it's been submitted and the deadline has occurred, I would use that and generally that would be what I would consider to be a public record, subject to, any confidentiality or exclusions.
okay.
Would they have to request that, or would, say we get a request for those applications? Would they have to put something in there saying that these are exempted, or would your office go to them and say, hey, I received a request?
Yeah, I think we'll probably give them that courtesy of saying we've received a request and let them have the opportunity to put forward any exemptions that they believe apply. Thank you.
Thanks, Cole. Okay, Lisa.
So I would just ask you, now you don't have a copy of the 5 categories, but I think, we've talked about those and Ed brought them up. Land conservation of an important natural area, water quality related to land conservation, largely directed at protecting drinking water supplies, conservation of working lands, which are farms and forests, conservation of recreational properties related to important natural areas, and conservation of historic properties adjacent to or integral to habitat restoration and enhancement. So those are basically what was in the legislation, for those 5 categories. So as we go into the appendix, there are 7 categories under project needs and benefits. So this is, broadly, does this project meet a need or a benefit? And I would say going back to those 5 statutory categories. One is outdoor recreation, And there's two questions here. One is, does it provide a new or enhanced recreational access to parks, green space, natural environment? And the second question is, will this provide an outdoor nature-based recreational opportunity? So trying to think through my mind how to consider these, thinking about the applications we received, I think that, and at any point, if anybody has a comment, but with the recreation, it is in association with a natural area. Was the intent. And it kind of goes into those there. We got a lot of applications and I don't know if it's okay to bring up examples because I think it gives us a real world context in which we need to look at this. Is there were a lot of applications for boat launches. And I don't know, that is giving you access to recreational areas that you may not have otherwise. But I don't know.
Well, I think that's where you would use that scalability, outdoor recreational opportunity. If, I'm just making up things here, but if, say, you're acquiring 1,000 acres of land for outdoor recreation, or, it's a boat ramp. Well, you're going to score those a little bit differently. So I think that's where you take each one of these categories and apply it to one. Does it meet, and hopefully it does, that's why we developed it, the objectives of the enabling legislation, and then how much does it do so? So I can see where, yeah, depending on what the outdoor recreational opportunity is, you would give it anywhere from 1 to however many points you felt like.
Yeah, and I think following on that, A, B, C, and D are ones that look to me to align with those 5 statutory categories, whereas the others are supportive, they're from a conservation standpoint, contiguousness between properties is value added. It's kind of, and future benefits. We want to look down the road. So I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I agree with you. And I think, the emphasis here again is the tie to the natural environment. And does that give does the project provide the public with an opportunity to better appreciate our natural resources and go on a hiking trail that has interpretive things or that type of thing?
Just to interject, that's what you just said about the first 3 categories really being about the eligibility that we already discussed. And I know that Scott mentioned he didn't want to weigh anything, but there's an argument that potentially you use 25 points of this 50 about, what the actual project was for, and then the other 25 are its supplemental supports, like you just said, maybe dividing it that way. That's what it looks like to me. Like if I had to evaluate today, that's probably how I do it. The other option would be if you wanted to do 10 for D through G and then 10 for A, B, and C combined. I know that Scott said he didn't want to weigh, but those are 2 options I got to try and get the math to work out.
And along those lines, right, the contiguous part, if you have 1,000 acres of habitat that's not contiguous, that's similar to a boat launch that might give you access to waterways that are surrounded by industrial developments rather than green spaces, right? So you could use that contiguous component to weight, sort of distinguish among otherwise similar scales of conservation or recreational access.
And also remember, I'm 1 vote. It's just my opinion.
And I think, if we look at there's these questions, but then there are the details. So under recreation, applicants should list any new or enhanced access provided to to natural areas, and must list all nature-based outdoor recreational opportunities. So I think this goes back to Ed's point about not only does it take some time to pull apart these questions and the criteria the applicant is supposed to approve. And then we have to go back and look at that application and say, well, it checks the, they tout recreation, but are they doing anything about nature-based recreation? Or is it a ballpark? Not to say ballparks are bad. It's just going back to what is this about? What's this
Right.
limited money for? So I think, I don't know that going through the exercise that I've initiated here, I think it's just going to expose that the time it's going to take for us to become individually familiar with the questions and the details, and then be able to apply that. But I'll walk through these really quick. Does anybody have anything to say about recreation in particular? And then we can circle back to the big picture. So culture and historical, we added this. A lot of these programs across the country for dedicated funding have some element that I think when they found important partnerships or ways to expand on natural resources, it's like, well, recreation is a big part of conserving an important natural area. A lot of times you'll have battlefields or other historical homes, James Audubon's place, and it's tied into the Tunica Hills and where he would go collect and paint birds, so there's this, not to tell the story of the Audubon Society there, but so I think that was the intent here, to include that. So it was interesting. I went back and I looked at what's a historical site. Like, is there a time? It has to be older than, but history started with yesterday was history, I guess, to some degree. But I think there's that essence you get that it really has something, from a long gone time, maybe. Then how the property has local, regional, statewide, cultural, historical value. So again, kind of really incumbent on us to filter down through the information we get. Water quality, does this project provide improvement to impaired water quality or protection of water quality to exceed the standards, including drinking water supplies? Applicants should describe how the project provides improvement of water quality and protection. So again, we had a range of projects that referenced one of their qualities that they fulfilled was water quality improvement, where it could be more of a stretch than others. We really just need to think what is providing improvement to that water resource, either for drinking water or for recreation, or is it a scenic stream? Those types of things. Ecological values. Anybody have anything on water quality or cultural heritage? So for ecological values, does the project provide enhancement of or conservation of important natural areas? And again, this is, I think, one of the cornerstones of this initiative and could garner more points than others if, depending on how we go with that. The second question, provide conservation, soil, water, and other natural resources, I think gets to the working lands component. That's a big cornerstone of this, as well as, how when we look at productive lands that are, farmlands or timberlands, and how is this helping fulfill that role and the importance of that in our economy, and looking at the water quality relationship. Does this project include acquisition or stewardship of land with significant ecological conservation, restoration, natural resource sustainability? The applicant must demonstrate the value of the project, including but not limited to native plant and animal species of concern, critical habitat. So again, just flagging that it's looking for.
And I was just going to emphasize for each of these criteria details, the role of the applicant in demonstrating the significance, right? So we may have knowledge of, and this is a little bit of a question, right? We may have knowledge of the project, but if the applicant doesn't do a good job in explaining the link between their project and this particular criterion, how do we as a reviewer then approach that, right? So I'll just throw that out there as a question. How much interpretation do we do into the how they hit the criteria versus our own personal knowledge of the project.
My opinion would be, we should know what the application says. And I would think bringing in other viewpoints would be sort of going out, sort of like getting a score and then changing it. To me, that's, the onus is on the applicant to give us the information. They've received all this information. They know what we're looking for. They know how we're scoring. If they don't fulfill that need, then shame on them. But that's me. Oh, we lost a general counsel and gained an undersecretary.
I apologize, I'm here late.
Please state your name. and-
Brian McClinton, Undersecretary of Wildlife Fisheries, but I'm on the project selection board. I'm glad to see Mr. Bro is here as well. So if I say something out of line, he could throw something at me. But I heard I was listening on the ride here, and I heard the question that you had presented about people being able to change, like match and that.
Mhm, mhm.
And I was hoping that, I know that the manual was someone asked a question about the manual saying like it needs tab approval if you want to change something. And I'm hoping today on public records, as we have sort of the tab present, to have this little discussion and saying like, y'all approved eligibility, partnership, and sort of that, if they've moved on. As long as that doesn't change, like you said, anything else, if they can get more money, less money, scalability. And to me, and what people have asked me about like full applications, I was like, go back and listen to when the technical advisory board reviewed your application, because they went through those little check boxes and they said where you may had, things that were unclear. And so hopefully they do that. And they take your advice and change that pre-application to when they go to that full application to meet those points that y'all discussed in that open
Ways to
meeting
improve
to
it.
what to improve. So I hope if y'all could, maybe, I don't know that it's not an action item, but as long as those three things don't change, scalability, other things, funding and stuff, I think would be wonderful if those people take that opportunity. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Well, I think an incredible job has been done in developing the manual and the work and the input. If I were to take a definition of something in here out and put it before 5 of us, we'd probably interpret it differently. And so I think one of the things that I've seen in other programs that work through this process is at this stage, and the challenge is, how do you do it in a way that everybody has access to the information? But they sometimes go back and ask the applicant questions. You've referenced this sounds phenomenal, but it's still not complete. Can you tell us this? You may not have questions about 9 out of 10 applications. I don't know if that's something where if we have a project that's just kind of, for some reason, we just feel like we can't get an answer, can we share that with the group and say, can we follow up with that applicant and ask that question, get clarification? I
would think you would have to do it in one of these meetings, because it'd be subject, one, we can't talk amongst
yeah,
ourselves.
right,
So we
right.
can't deliberate. And then I think that would be outside of the APA process. So I think we would have to encourage all applicants, once we start down this path, to attend the meetings,
Right.
so that, sort of like they did during the initial phase. We had a question, we'd call them to the mic, they would answer the
Right.
question. So I think that would be their opportunity, and that would be appropriate.
And I think, yeah, along those lines, I guess, and I'm not staying true to following through this appendices, but it's just to schedule, if we feel like we're going to have a couple more meetings, to schedule those and get those out and inform, I don't know if we can email the applicants to say these meetings will be coming up. It would behoove you to show up and, that
Angela, I believe we had done that last time, didn't we? Encourage the applicants to attend the meeting? Yes.
There,
So-
We did. We sent an email out to them to let them know what dates we would be reviewing them and encourage them to come.
That does create a bias, however, because of the geography, right?
If you
So,
can't.
so the further an applicant is from Baton Rouge,
Mm,
that bias is against them. Just want to,
Because of the
flag that.
time and the resource
Yep,
it takes to be. Here. Mhm. Yeah, I don't know how we handle needing additional clarification. And I think that after all this is finished, it'll be good to go back and debrief and say, I think if we clarify this question more the next round, then it'll be helpful to all involved.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that what we had said was that they needed to provide a phone number and an email address. So that way, if y'all did have some sort of question, we could call them or email them to ask them something.
we need to make sure that process is equitable.
Mhm,
Absolutely.
mhm. That's a good point. So ecological value, then moving into the more detailed pieces, contiguous, is the project contiguous with other conservation properties? Applicants should demonstrate that the project is contiguous, so map, or I guess a description of how it's adjacent to a state park or an already protected natural area of the conservation fund, or whatever that may be. And, you know, of course, that's important, particularly as the landscape gets chopped up with development and species that need, like wide-ranging species like bear or other large mammals that need a lot of habitat to forage and survive, basically. But also for bird species that need patches of a certain size, a certain distance. And so I think that's one of those that can add a lot of value to a project. So I think future benefits, this is the one that gets to, I guess we discuss permanence versus term, kind of like a term easement versus a permanent easement, and the return for the investment if you do a shorter term project. And so we didn't want to ding, I think, term or shorter term projects, but we said we wanted to allow for consideration that if a project is preserving something as a state park in perpetuity, then that's perhaps more towards the intention of the program and the investment of public dollars. I think that that would be important to our legislature to see that. Any comments or thoughts on that? You know, it says clarify or clearly identify your project's anticipated lifespan and how it will yield benefits into the future. And stewardship, lastly, you know, taking care of something can be more challenging than the initial project execution. So does the applicant demonstrate, let's see, conservation sustainable practices, protect the features, assist the property in remaining relevant in the community, encourage visitation, you know, so not only, I guess, is it taking care of that resource, but ensuring its maintenance. If it's for public use and recreation, is there some framework that we feel like allows that to be cared for every year? You know, it's a state agency or it's a local government that's going to be around and they're committing resources to it. So, so anything on those generally, specifically? So going into partnerships, we spent a lot of time on this one, and I think clarified that if it's a government entity, it's check the box. If it's a nonprofit organization, that they need to have a working relationship, a partnership, and there's been information added to the manual and description on how you could qualify for that. So I think that one's has some support associated with it. Is Brian coming to say something? Oh, okay. Number 3, underserved area or area of designated need. Does this project satisfy specific and clearly identified needs within an underserved area or area of designated need? which I think this goes so far beyond, in the pre-application, I think we just asked the question. I can't remember the language in the pre-application, but everybody used is it Justice 40 or which,
It actually, the online version of this is slightly more expanded.
okay.
And it references the White House Justice 40 website,
Mm.
but that the website is not the sole determinant.
Yeah. We added
Oh,
that.
here, yeah, it's in,
We added that
It
to
is?
that
well, my
discussion.
copy. Sorry.
Oh,
Not
you
the
might
copy
have
that
an
was
old
just
version.
handed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I printed mine off the web. But yeah, it is in there after discussion during the initial phase. We decided to, I think this was in there early. This website was in there early, and then it was taken out because they didn't want it to be the only source that they used, and it could be any source. But now the website's back in there, and it says this website is not the sole determination of underserved areas or areas of designated need. So it kind of broadens it, but gives them some resource to utilize.
Well, and I think what you find though, if you go to that website, 90% of Louisiana fits.
Yeah.
And to me, I think the intent of the question here, and everybody can weigh in on that, is this project helping an underserved community? Will it provide a benefit like more access to outdoor recreation or, jobs or whatever? So I think to me, I'd kind of flip it around a little bit, not just say, is this an underserved, lower income community, but is the project actually going to do something for that community?
Well, and
that
if you
will
read the
address?
criteria question, it says, does this project specifically satisfy specific and clearly identified needs within an underserved
Mhm.
area? So,
Yeah, I think, I'm just saying, to think about it beyond the Justice 40. So, yeah. The matching funds, what percentage of it is of in-kind match will be provided? And then there's a note just that they should be included and highlighted in the budget and with written documentation. And I think this is an interesting one in that somebody can provide 5% or somebody else is providing 50%. We haven't gone through this where we kind of have a benchmark or, we know, and I don't know how it would work. Let's say, go ahead, Eric.
No.
I was just going to say, if a federal funding source requires a 50% match, and we're using this, I don't, that to me adds, and we get that 50%, we're being asked for that 50%, but it's going to match something. I don't know. Because there were all scales of match amounts in the pre-applications that we saw. Some with none or very little, but they were substantive projects. So this could be a challenging one to say, well, yeah, there was a match, 10 points, but is it?
What deserves 10 points is the fundamental question. Is it a 1-to-1? Is it 2-to-1? Is it, right? So we don't have a scale to go off of.
Right.
Right, but I think it should be scalable. It's not in my opinion, they shouldn't be check boxes for the most part.
Right.
If it's a, 90% match, well, then it's going to get my 10 points. But if it has no match, then it's not going to get it, or
Mhm,
1% match, then it's
mhm,
not going to get
mhm.
it's not going to get 10 points.
And that's a great point. Going back to question 2 about partnerships, this isn't from an eligibility standpoint. I don't think it's, to me, this question, and I kind of put it in that eligibility category. I think this is more about, just like with matching funds, are you bringing a lot of creative partners to the table? Maybe they're not putting money in the pot, and maybe they're not the one you've signed off with that's creating the eligibility for an NGO, but you have a very diverse group of community groups or neighborhoods involved or whatever. So I'm just sorry, thought about that. I wanted to back up and say that's also kind of the broad reach of some of these. Okay, so. Is it affiliated, question 5, is it affiliated with a local, state, regional plan? Applicant must cite the relevant plan. You know, and even in the pre-applications, we got a lot of things that was like, this is the parish recreation plan, you know, so I guess if it was a recreation project, it would qualify. I don't know, that we never broke it down into the expectation that it would be part of the State Wildlife Action Plan or the SCORP or, which I don't remember what that stands for, but it's the state park prioritization. But it'll be good to have, I think as we see these and we see the context of the plan, is that really, again, meeting with the larger goals of this program?
Yeah, and of course, you know, there are economic development plans too, but if there isn't a tie to the question 1, ecological, recreational, or cultural heritage, then for me, that's a 0, right? Is that what we're trying to clarify here?
Well, it's
Is-
interesting. If you go down to the next one, which is about economic development benefits, it says the applicant may provide the following to show that positive impact economically, current comprehensive plan. So maybe it doesn't get points under 5 as a kind of being part of a conservation plan, natural resource plan, but it's part of an economic development plan. So yeah, and it lists all these examples down here, which I think should also be appropriate to 5 because it talks about the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, current trail system plan. Some of these are written kind of, what we're looking for is more official documentation that ties it into an agency or a government entity that's vetted it to make sure that it's benefiting on a larger scale. And so that's the intent. This is a little nebulous here to me, but. And then question 8 goes back to maintenance, which kind of is it's the same thing as stewardship. Do you have a plan budget to maintain, manage, and secure the property and multiple years of commitment beyond the completion date? I kind of jumped ahead to the second question there, but so we have a great comprehensive list. I think we're trying to look at all of the permutations of a project and as we talked about a moment ago, I think just really familiarizing ourselves with the questions and the criteria, the details. What are we really asking for associated with these before we dive into the applications individually to do that? But I think it goes back to, for me, somewhat the allocation. And I guess I just would ask the group, do you feel like it would help from a guidance standpoint to say, we're going to put more points to the 4 categories that are associated with the statutory criteria and less to the others under question 1, or leave it kind of for everybody's interpretation? I mean, based on the conversation and everything. And Taylor, you shared your thoughts about kind of.
Yeah, after further discussion, I think I would prefer personally just A, B, and C be 10 points in general, and then D, E, F, and G have 10 points each. It's probably fairer than the 25-25 bucket that I had originally thought about.
So I'm sorry, you proposed 10 points each for ecological value, contiguous future benefits, and no, wait a minute, you couldn't do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Well, that's
40
more than,
points.
we only have 50.
Yeah, so weighing those more and then A, B,
Yeah.
and C, since those are, they read as eligibility requirements to me, just giving that 10 points with those, like that they fall under that, they meeting eligibility and what their project's about.
Why not B?
Hmm?
Why not B? You said A, B, and C, right? Not D?
Because I'm just trying to remember off the pre-selection she's giving me an A, B, and C from my memory. That was really what that
It's D
chunk was
too. It's
about.
those 4.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
because
then
that's really the.
You can include
D.
D in that initial plump. That's just me not remembering.
I was gonna say that, clearly each one of these individual questions has scalability to it from our allocations. We're gonna be wrestling with that for each one of these individually. And whether we settle on, an allocation for question one today or not, my, suggestion to this group is that going into this, each one of us individually, we need to take the onus on ourselves to make certain that the way we're treating one proposal is the way we're treating all proposals in our assessments. We've got to, as scorers, we've got to define where we're going to weight these. And so, I just want to implore this group that, we're treating each one of these across the board equitably and making decisions for that, particularly that question one, and holding to those decisions individually.
So, I think it's a very good discussion. I think it's some interesting points that have been raised. Comparing the 5 eligibility components in the legislation to all of the criteria questions under project needs and benefits. I feel like the legislation determined whether or not the projects were eligible at all. And we may not really need to try and tie the criteria questions under project needs and benefits to the legislation, to those 5 eligibility components. I think we may be able to just compare each project against these criterias and determine their project needs and benefits that way, and compare them among the other projects that we reviewed. Trying to weight them based on the 5 points in the legislation. I feel like once they became eligible, they passed that point in the process, and now we're just looking at these criteria rather than trying to tie them back into the legislation and provide weight to certain ones that way. But I think it's an interesting discussion, and I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to say. I do need to say that I'm going to have to leave here in about 5 minutes. I have a meeting at the Claiborne building at 11 I have to get back to. But I will tune into the archive video and see how the remainder of the discussion went.
And I wish I had thought about this before Cole left, but I wonder if we have the ability to change this document. Because this was part of the package that we developed and sent to the project selection board for promulgation. I don't know if we can amend this, or quite frankly, should during the application process.
Well, we've changed other things.
What do we change?
That what is a qualified partner?
Actually, that went to the project selection board for approval.
I would have to suspect that this Appendix A has been promulgated in the administrative code. So I think we probably can't change it at this point.
It was included.
Yeah, right. The legislation made clear that we had to promulgate the criteria and scoring.
But the only thing I would add, Cheston, to your point, if we can't change it, it can't be changed, is that while alignment with those 5 criteria in the legislation was a part of the process of being qualified or eligible, we didn't dig into the degree to which it fulfilled those. It was just kind of like, oh, it's a park, it's a boat landing. We didn't say, oh, is this connected to an important conservation area?
Right. Yeah.
So I think we, again, it sounds like we're going to be left to our own devices. But just, I think even, from Ed's comments to the discussion we've had here, is to think about it from a little bit narrower window. As I've thought about all of those applications that have been received, they all have value. They all are doing good things. It's just, is this program intended to do all of those things? And do we actually have the financial resources to do all those? So if we spread our money to all of those types of things, the impact, I think, will be less. And it will also not fulfill the original intent to say, we have the opportunity to bring down 10 times as much money from the federal government to leverage this conservation or, so I think to just try to be thinking about it through that filter as we go through each of these elements.
I agree and disagree with you. I agree that we should use those 5 criteria to guide how we go through this and how we score it. I don't think we should consider how much money is going to go out. Our charge is to be the subject matter experts that ranks this for the project selection board. I think the project selection board are the ones who decide how to spread the money as best they can. So I think we have a narrower focus, and I think we are looking at what is best for the resource. Whether or not they spread the money or however they get bang for their buck, I think that's up to the project selection board, in my opinion. But yes, I think those 5 things should be sort of our constitution. And that's what drives how we make decisions on the rest of us, on the rest of this. And I agree wholeheartedly with that part. All right. So yeah, I'm not sure how we proceed. I'm not sure, and I'd like to get direction from Cole if we could change these. So what's the will of the board? What would y'all like to do on this?
You mean specific to
Do you want to
applying,
continue?
breaking down that 50 points?
Yeah, do you want to assign different points to the 7 selections under question 1, or do you want to leave it scalability up to the reviewer?
Yeah, question 1 essentially has 11 questions for a maximum of 50 points. So, it does kind of leave a lot of discretion to the individual scorer.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it just it would just create a little bit of a framework for keeping the consistency, because even our position on here will change over time. And so for consistency, if we say these areas are, if we agree to this, more important than these others, or are more, because if we look at ecological value, it says under there wildlife habitat and corridors. Well, there's contiguity. So there's those 4 major categories. The first 4, I think, encapsulate some of these other elements and are just the more critical ones. They all play into it. But so, I would make a motion that if we're allowed to modify this, that we do create a more detailed scoring for question 1, allocating more points to A through D.
If you can make a motion, I would.
Or should I have done that? I can withdraw
I would-
it if that's.
I would prefer if you make the motion for the change instead of a motion to change. In my opinion, the motion should be, I make a motion to assign X.
Okay, more
points to-
specific.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and then we can vote on that.
Perhaps we can just go about it as an interpretation of the 50 points, which may not require a change to the document.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'm not sure that we're obligated to change this document in order to decide among ourselves how we want to assign the points. For example, the 11 points, say it was only 10. See, if it were 10, then you would have a fairly easy allocation just based on the number of questions. You would have 5 points for each criteria question within A through G. And that would mean that you're basically weighting ecological value highest. Outdoor recreational opportunity and cultural and historical value would be tied at number 2, and so forth. I'm not sure why there's so many more questions under some of these others than there are under the other ones, but it seems like that's because they're considered more important.
I've done a quick breakdown and perhaps we can just assign A, B, C, and D 8 points each. And 6 points for the other 3, showing that we weight those first 4 more heavily. And to Eric's point, if one ticks the box for more than one of those categories, we are showing value for that project.
I would suggest then that probably none of the projects would ever get the full 50 points. Right, because no project will ever hit all 4 of those unless it's a dream project, I suppose, right? And maybe that is the goal.
So what's an
Yeah.
alternative?
Well, the alternative, I think, was the initial discussion of giving A through D a score.
chunk,
And
okay.
then E through G a chunk. So if it hits any of those, then it gets
Mhm.
potentially a full score. But
And I would suggest that we don't have to hit 50 points on the majority applications or,
agreed.
yeah. So I think it's going to take a stellar application to get to 50 points. So
No, and that's a great point, Ray, is that it's max 50. You do not have to
Right,
assign
right,
50,
Right.
50 potential points.
I think either suggestion are good suggestions. I don't have a strong opinion either way, but I kind of do like the idea of giving us a little bit more guidance, whether it's formal or informal, to
Mhm,
this
mhm.
first category. This first.
Do I have a motion?
I mean, do we feel comfortable? Well, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna, this is a question, not a
Oh,
motion.
yeah, we're still in the discussion.
So for A through D, we give 35 points, and for E, F, and G, we give 15 points. So it's lumping, it's saying that just adds up to 50, so I came up with that. But do we feel like that gives a little bit more leeway in considering the 4 categories in there, or is it like, because like cultural and historical value may be one of the lesser considered things. And so do we want to give it 8 points? Whereas if we feel like, wow, this is protecting 100 acres of a patch of land that connects to a state park and a national wildlife refuge, and, you know, it's on a scenic stream, it's like, let's give that one 35 points, you know.
If we are going to divide the points for that, I think that's a better idea than giving each section their own point.
Okay. So I move that we allocate under Appendix A 35 points total for, did I say under question 1, 35 points for numbers A or letters A through D, and then 15 points for E, F, and G.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And I
Motion-
guess I would just say this is contingent.
Right. I
Well,
know.
so we'll kind of agree to it internally if it can be added
Yes.
formally so that the applicants understand the significance of those 4 categories. I think
And-
would be helpful to them.
And if
but-
not, that will be our informal
Okay, cool.
scoring tool.
Have we received any full applications yet?
No, we have not.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we didn't discuss how we wanted to do this. If we wanted to get Angela to create a spreadsheet and compile as we go. Cole was of the opinion that it would not be public until and when the deadline So how does the board feel about that?
So you're saying for each, go ahead, I'm sorry.
For when we did the pre-application evaluations, we had that sheet and then I think we all kind of worked off of them and graded them that way and we came prepared with them. Can we just do something similar with this and then submit them to Angela if that's the method we need to do for her to create the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I would imagine we would basically have that spreadsheet to go by or something similar. You would work through the application, score it as you see fit, and then however we submit it to Angela, and then she populates the compiled sheet.
Yeah, and it gave me a pause to hear Cole talk about how we're really submitting an assessment, which doesn't tie us just to an average of the, the scores for each of the applications. So, and I don't know what the board's interest is. I'm just thinking we maybe individually, tally up for each project according to these scoring criteria, provide that to Angela, and then meet to not have that be the final submission.
Oh, no.
But, okay.
No,
I'm just kind of putting it in that
correct.
context.
In my vision, there will be a master spreadsheet with each one of the projects and scores for each one of the categories out to the side. That's completed, that's compiled. You would have to have an average because some of us can't score projects. So like wildlife and fisheries would be have a problem because if you just total the score, me not be able to score any of our projects would give them less weight. So I would think it would be an average score.
Mhm.
Then we have a meeting, we get together and we go through that and like I said, debate, had the scoring and say, well, you gave it a, 20 right here. Why? And let's talk about that.
Mhm.
And I think that's a much better, more efficient than certainly coming here and just talking through them and then scoring.
no.
So,
That would be an overnight.
no, and again, I know it goes without saying, but we have to stay on top of this and we have to score them as they come in. You have to stay on top of that wave or you're going to drown.
Because it will take time.
So is your suggestion if we have questions on that proposal that we need to ask someone, that we would still score it based off not knowing what that question would be? And then once we get more information, we could adjust that score?
Yeah, I would make notes off on the side. And then when we come to the meeting, that would be the opportunity to ask the entity to answer those questions.
Or to email them or whatever is,
Correct, during the
and then. so-
public meeting.
So it's going to be kind of a rolling process, which is good.
And then I think there was some discussion, it may have been in the Outdoor Forever Steering Committee about a joint meeting. Is there any opinion about having a joint meeting before we do this or
With the project.
with the project selection board, sorry? Is there any appetite for that or need or is that something we could always do it when we have our compiled list, when we have our prioritized list, we could ask, generally I would bring it to them and present it, but there's no reason why we couldn't meet
Mhm.
in conjunction with the board
Mhm.
for a
To
full
share more.
discussion. That's an opportunity.
Yeah, I think the thinking of the steering committee is that just like we're kind of looking at some of these questions and coming at it from very different vantage points. And ultimately, they're the decision makers. So, and they're coming at this from their own perspectives again, and will have had even less time to really consider all of these permutations. So it was that we felt like if we came together and kind of shared where we're coming from, our considerations as we went through each of these criteria and at least provide that context then for them to have the conversation and go through the discussion.
Well, I'll definitely have that conversation with Brian. And then when we get to that point, we can request that we have a joint meeting. Okay, so where we are now is we have discussed the scoring criteria, we have preliminary weighted question 1. And if we have the ability, we will assign that weighted weight to the different questions. And then is it the will of this board that Angela create a spreadsheet and that we send her our scores as soon as we compile them, and then that she keeps that until our first meeting?
Does Angela get to vote on that?
I would ask for that. Please. If
Be
not, I'll do
helpful.
it. I'll have to do it myself.
Yeah. So I'm almost imagining the spreadsheet being 50 tabs for one for each project. You'd have rows being, or columns, whatever, being the voters, right? The board members. And then the other axis would be the different questions. Does that sound right? So we would have a matrix for each project of the votes broken down by question for each board member.
And we would just be doing it for ourselves and support, I
Yeah.
mean, the spreadsheet could initially just be for the individual to fill it out, and then we all send them to
compile it.
you.
Yeah, and then you could have a roll up
Copy and
page.
pasting.
Yeah.
You could have
yeah.
a tab that does the roll up
Yeah.
for the average score.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, I'm okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. That wasn't the way I was envisioning it, but I see where you're coming from. Cause I wasn't looking at how we had the spreadsheet originally, where, we have everything on that one spreadsheet with all 50 projects listed out. And I was just thinking like, we just keep extending onto it and it's like, okay, here's the scores. But I see what you're saying though as well.
So you're saying one tab would have for each application and each tab member and then their scores across for each question? Or-
Yeah, there's two different
criteria.
tabs in that sentence. One is
Yes.
the technical advisory board and one is the spreadsheet tab, but yes.
Correct, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes.
I'm thinking spreadsheets. Okay.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
All right, any other discussion regarding the rating of the applications?
You had touched on it briefly. Is there any guidance on recusal or abstaining from voting for? the
Yes,
board?
we will not be allowed to rank applications from each one of our different groups. So I can't score wildlife and fisheries and so on.
We can't score on our organizations.
Anything you're affiliated with.
Does affiliation extend to partnerships?
I would think so, but I will ask Cole for that determination. Because yeah, I have
Some
letters
those
of
projects
support.
Have a lot of partners
Yeah.
or a lot of people on the.
I'm going to cancel my
tab.
letters of support. I'll have to see what level of affiliation is a disqualifier.
Right, so if LDWF submitted a letter of support for a project, even if they're not the lead, they've supported it already, they've demonstrated support.
Yeah.
Does that create a conflict?
It could.
Yes,
I will
okay,
ask,
Wow.
thank you.
or we'll just pull our support.
Well, then, lessen the number of applications we need to consider.
I'm kidding.
Great question. Hmm?
All right, any other discussion about review of applications?
I'd just like to thank the group for spending some time today going through this, and Ed coming in to present some context. And, we're just very excited about being at this point and appreciate everybody being so committed to making this work. Because this
thanks,
is,
Ed.
I was saying, this is our first rodeo. People usually always say, this isn't my first, but this is ours. And it's going to be very precedent setting, I think, as we go forward. And I think make the case for future committed, recurring funding for the program, which is the goal. So thanks.
And I ask any applicants watching, turn in your applications as quickly as possible. Don't wait till the last minute and kill us with them. Any public comment? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Adjourned. Thank you all very much.